I'm Lynn Bolin, Director and Chief Curator of the Gregory Alucard Museum of Art at Colorado State University. And this is the first video iteration of our Music in the Museum concert series. I'll be joined shortly by Dr. Joel Bacon, Associate Professor of Music and Stewart and Sherrod Golden Chair of Organ and Liturgical Studies at Colorado State University. And our program today is crafted in conjunction with the exhibition Cercle Carré and the International Spirit of Abstract Art. We're especially grateful to our sponsors of this program, Linda and Patrick McNamara, and Dr. Thomas Navrivi, Associates in Family Medicine. Our concert takes its inspiration from the exhibition Cercle Carré and the International Spirit of Abstract Art, which examines the influential but short-lived artistic group known as Cercle Carré, French for circle and square. The group was founded in 1929 by Uruguayan-Spanish artist Joaquin Torres Garcia, the Belgian poet and critic Michel Safour, and Pierre Daura, born Pedro, or Pere Daura, in the Catalan region of Spain. The international group of more than 80 artists was based in Paris and included notable members such as Vasily Kandinsky, Pete Mondrian, Alexandra Exter, Jean Arp, Fernand Léger, Le Corbusier, Sophie Deuber-Arp, and many, many others. They formed in reaction against surrealism and what they saw as its indulgent subjectivity, and sought to advance ideas of structure and construction, bringing together a broad coalition of artists working in various abstract styles, predominantly geometrically abstract art, but including both highly abstracted yet still recognizable subjects and totally abstract works without representational imagery. Cercle Carré's participants included members of numerous modern art movements active in Europe in the period between the World Wars, including Dada, Futurism, Purism, Constructivism, and the Style. Emphasizing the universal nature of abstraction, the group was democratic in nature. Its members were male and female, emerging and established from Western and Eastern Europe, North and South America, and Russia. Although short-lived, it served as a catalyst for a number of other important international artistic movements of the 1930s, such as Abstraction Création in Paris and Torres Garcia's Círculo y Cuadrado in South America. Cercle Carré members published their theories in the group's journals and presented their work in their sole exhibition, held in 1930 in Paris. At the time, they were largely ignored or derided by critics, but the exhibition is now considered a landmark event in the history of modernism. In retrospect, the emergence of totally abstract art in early 20th century Europe seems inevitable. Avant-garde artists were increasingly abstracting their images, for instance, the non-naturalistic colors of Matisse's Fauvism, and the exploration of underlying geometric forms of Picasso's Cubism. Much of the underlying impetus to abstract was driven by the changing scientific worldview of the time. Late 19th century discoveries like X-rays, electrons, radioactive matter, and wireless telegraphy all encouraged artists to break down visible forms and seek out the unseen and the immaterial around them. For many early abstractionists, strong spiritual beliefs also played a central role in their drive to abstract. The Czech artist František Kupka, active in Paris, was the first to publicly exhibit a totally abstract painting, that is, a painting with no references to visible imagery. Amorpha, fugue in two colors, shown at the Salon d'Automne in Paris, which opened in October 1, 1912. Kupka's work takes its inspiration from a musical form, the intertwining melodies of a fugue, and as we will see, as an art form that expresses meaning through purely formal relationships, music would prove an especially important source for modern artists first seeking meaningful abstraction. In 1913, visual artists throughout Europe and Russia would begin adopting totally abstract styles, making paintings and sculptures devoid of representational imagery. Music played a significant role for many of these artists, who took inspiration from and made frequent references to music in their work. At the same time, early 20th century composers in Europe and Russia were pushing the boundaries of traditional harmony, using more and more dissonant intervals, moving further and further towards what would be called atonality. Atonal music is a general term to describe music that does not rely on a tonal center. In the Western classical tradition, music is most often organized around a structure that is hierarchical. Certain musical pitches are prioritized. For instance, major scales, do, re, mi, etc., a subset of the available tones, or major and minor chords. These form the organizing center for tonal music. Intervals of notes traditionally considered pleasing. Other intervals are considered dissonant, still used, but usually for expressive effect, for instance, tension and resolution. Atonal music uses other organizing principles. Before we look at the primary piece of our concert, a work by Arnold Schoenberg, let's consider atonality with a very brief example by the Hungarian composer Bela Bartók from Mikrokosmos, a collection of 153 piano pieces in 6 volumes, written between 1926 and 1939. The piece we'll hear, Syncopation, takes an almost playful approach to redefining musical structures within the work. Put simply, it begins with a traditional harmony, a G major triad, set against a dissonant dyad. A short phrase which begins to be repeated but is broken at the third measure of the work with a B flat, longer duration. This becomes a pivot for the piece. What was dissonant in the traditional sense becomes the new organizing feature of an atonal work. Bartók is creating a piece here built around symmetry. Rather than using dissonance to move a piece towards its tonal resolution, he uses an imbalance of the interval relationships that resolves to a balanced relationship, even while it remains highly dissonant in the traditional sense. Now, let's hear it. Thank you, Jewel. Now, this symmetrical tension and resolution is admittedly easier to see if analyzing the musical score. But especially with repeated listening, I think it does become apparent. This speaks to a larger concern of composers and visual artists of the era, where dissonance, and as Arnold Schoenberg would describe, the emancipation of the dissonance, would be seen not just as an artistic form for its own sake, but as a means of propelling advanced perception and of encouraging higher states of consciousness. The connection between abstract art and music and ideas about states of higher consciousness were all especially important for Vasily Kandinsky, a Russian artist active in Germany at the time. Kandinsky probably best championed a theoretical groundwork for total abstraction in its early years with his publication in 1912 of On the Spiritual in Art. With near constant references to music in the text, in his paintings, and in his notes and letters, it is clear that Kandinsky saw in music an analog for total abstraction in painting. Furthermore, through friendships with musicians such as Thomas von Hartmann and Arnold Schoenberg, Kandinsky was aware of parallel developments in avant-garde music theory and composition. In the early years of the 20th century, composers like Bartók and Schoenberg abandoned traditional musical scales and key signatures, replacing them with new systems of organization in the same way that artists like Kandinsky and others were reinventing visual forms. Kandinsky saw further connections to his art theories and goals in this new dissonant atonal music, and it was a central source for major works such as Composition 7 of 1913. At the outset of his foray into total abstraction, Kandinsky faced a common problem: how to convey meaning through purely formal relationships of shapes and colors. Initially, he pursued a strategy that the scholar Rose Carroll Washington Long called veiling and stripping away recognizable subject matter and veiling it with abstract forms. His frequent themes from the Book of Revelations also speak to his abiding spiritual interests, especially the anthroposophy movement of Rudolf Steiner, an offshoot of theosophy, a kind of synthesis of world religions. Music was a critical source in Kandinsky's artistic development, especially on the verge of total abstraction, when he was first introduced to atonal music. On January 1st, 1911, Kandinsky attended a concert of the Viennese composer Arnold Schoenberg's music, performed in Munich. Schoenberg had been moving towards atonality, using more and more dissonances in his work, and the concert included his string quartet in D minor, Opus 10 of 1908, the last movement of which is atonal, and 3 piano pieces, Opus 11 of 1909, Schoenberg's first completely atonal composition. This is the period of Schoenberg's work described as free atonality, a precursor to his later serial 12-tone atonality. Kandinsky was deeply moved, and although he could not have immediately understood the processes and underlying theories of Schoenberg's new harmony, he sensed their implications, and the concert prompted a correspondence and friendship that would continue for years. This was the period in which Kandinsky was developing his totally abstract style, and his growing understanding of Schoenberg's musical ideas served as a critical model. In explaining his theories, Schoenberg especially pointed to its scientific basis, embodied in what he called, quote, the emancipation of the dissonance, quote. In the mid-19th century, German physicist Hermann von Helmholtz described the overtone series of musical pitches. These are the result of sympathetic acoustical vibrations, and they're closely related to the underlying basis of traditional harmony. Put simply, acoustical vibrations cause vibrations in other matter, sympathetic vibrations. Now, this is probably most clearly demonstrated in a piano. The rate of vibrations of a note will cause certain other strings to vibrate. The most prominent is at the octave, then the notes of a major triad, and continuing through other harmonic relationships, these based in turn on mathematical ratios. Many of these mathematical relationships had been known since at least the Pythagoreans of ancient Greece, but with the measurements afforded by new technology, Helmholtz was able to describe this series of sympathetic vibrations in the overtone series to a much greater extent than before. Schoenberg argued, therefore, that there really weren't musical dissonances. There were just more remote consonances. Therefore, every note, every intervallic relationship was equal, the emancipation of the dissonance. Like Bartók's syncopation, Schoenberg's 3 piano pieces is organized around structures other than traditional harmony. It also uses processes of symmetry, in addition to other means. Schoenberg establishes what scholar George Pearl calls cells, small collections of prominent musical intervals in the work that are modified to develop and organize the piece. The first 3 notes of the piece make up what Pearl called cell A. Cell B is introduced in the 4th measure. These intervals, or spatial relationships of notes, are modified and developed through processes of inversion, retrograde, and retrograde inversion, along with symmetrization. These cells are expanded so that what was traditionally dissonant becomes the organizing structure of the work. Schoenberg loosely used the traditional sonata form, with an exposition in the first movement, a development in the second, and a recapitulation in the third, a traditional form using very untraditional means. Returning for a moment to Kandinsky, these ideas of establishing a small collection of intervals that are then modified and expanded, became the primary means of organizing his first major totally abstract work, Composition 7 of 1913. A central motif of concentric circles is modified and repeated throughout the rest of the painting. This concentric circle form embodied much for the artist and was the subject of dozens of studies. Now, this, and much more of its context, will be the topic of another forthcoming video offering. So let's leave the art history and musicology there for now, and return to the performance. But first, Joel, could we hear cell A again, please? Thank you. And cell B? Thanks. Now, Arnold Schoenberg's Drei Klavierstücke, 3 piano pieces, Opus 11, 1909, performed by Dr. Joel Bacon. Thank you, Joel. I hope you all were as moved by that as I was. I'd like to thank some of the many others who made this program possible. Jim Dozer, CSU's University Center for the Arts technician, the museum's Design and Communication Manager, Sylvia Minguzzi, and Dr. Abigail Shoup, Assistant Professor of Music Theory at CSU, who organizes this concert series. I'd like to note that my comments today were drawn from my doctoral dissertation, and I'd like to thank my entire committee from the University of Texas at Austin, but especially art historian Linda Henderson and the late musicologist Elliot Anakolitz. Our profound thanks again to our sponsors, Linda and Patrick McNamara, and Dr. Thomas Navrivi, Associates in Family Medicine, who support this year's series. And the Dowra Foundation, whose generous grant made possible this program and the presentation of this exhibition at the Gregory Alucard Museum of Art at Colorado State University. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I hope you'll return for more. Stay safe.